we have to come to our big story, which is Virginia District spends $34,000 on critical race theory. And they have something, they bought like 55 hours worth of training of critical race theory for their schools. I wonder if we can get like a good source on this. Yahoo News is terrible. Let's look at them. Let's see. And of course, it has to be obtained from a Freedom of Information Act. Ugh, these people. Well, anyways, I won't bore you guys reading the article, but essentially, why do they write so many words? Holy, look at this though. Anyways, the point being is, Virginia spent 34 grand teaching critical race theory, and I was like, you know what? I don't know that much about critical race theory, so I was like, we should all learn about it together on stream. So I found a cute PBS video about it. Haven't watched it yet, but I was like, why don't we watch this together? So here we go. This is Watch. What is critical race theory? It is gay.
Let's start with a basic definitional question. When you hear critical race theory over and over again, what should people understand? How do you define CRT?
So I first want to just make a distinction between CRT, which is a theoretical framework that I learned in graduate school and read about in graduate school, versus teaching about race and racism in American history critically. So critical race theory is a framework. It's a theoretical framework that was developed in the 1980s by legal scholars to help us understand how it is that structural and racial disparities endure in our society, and how that is actually engendered in some of our laws and policies.
See, they always try to code what they're saying with all this flowery, colorful language, and I always get suspicious when they do that. What's she say?
Our society, and how that is actually engendered in some of our laws and policies.
How that engenders in some of our laws and policies.
Get us to think systemically, as opposed to just thinking that racism manifests by individuals just mistreating each other. That there are actual structures in our society that create these different kinds of racial gaps and racial disparities.
Her eyes are so open. Why is she not blinking?
Economically, in terms of housing, in terms of education. And so that's what they do, is that they actually show us how the law, how laws that are supposed to be neutral actually can promulgate or support racial disparity.
I get it. Okay. So basically, critical race theory is explaining how racism isn't on an individual level. So if someone like kills you because of your race, that's not racism. That's only one component of it. What racism really is when an institution discriminates against you, like affirmative action, right? Like how cops kill whites faster than they kill blacks. Like things like that involve institutions. So basically, the implication of this, and the reason why they're doing it this way, is they don't want you to have an out. They don't want you to say, oh, I'm not racist, so don't be mad at me. They want to frame this in a way that they can say to you, oh, we know you're not racist, but the system that your people built is racist and you benefit from it. Therefore, you're still bad and you still owe me reparations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Very dark stuff.
Neutral, actually.
Right, and then this part, she's saying how even neutral policies. Okay, so let's say a policy that says, all murderers in the US get 20 years in prison or whatever, 25 years or any number, right? But it's a very neutral law. It applies to every single person equally. In this person's mind, that would be inadequate. That would not be good enough for addressing these racial problems in America, because these neutral laws will still disproportionately affect black people. Not because they commit more crime, but because America's racist, but because our institutions are racist. So again, what you can see that they're driving at towards here is not fairness and equality, like, Republicans and Democrats will have you believe, but it's actually something quite different. They are moving towards a very anti-white stance, and they're justifying it right here. You can hear her justifying this right now, today. This is what she is teaching her students at Berkeley, that all of a sudden, we do need reparations, and we do need different sentencing laws, and we do need different criteria for blacks and whites. And what do you think this is going to lean, who do you think this is going to lean in favor of more? Blacks or whites, right? Obviously, in America, the criteria will always lean more leniently on blacks than whites. It is always going to be more harsh on whites than it is on blacks when we're talking about changing these policies to benefit a specific race. There's absolutely no way in the US, and anytime soon, that we're going to see policies that benefit whites over blacks. But we will see, most likely in the near future, policies that benefit blacks over whites. And again, used through this type of justification where even neutral laws, even saying, anyone with a, 3.5 GPA gets into this university, that's racist because high schools are racist, which means blacks have lower grades. So therefore, any black kid with a 3.0 can get in, and white kids need a 3.7 GPA to get in. You're going to see that, and you're going to see it in a lot more sinister ways than just getting into university. You're going to see it in a lot worse ways than just getting a job. It's going to become reparations, and it's going to become things much more severe than that in the future.
And promulgate or support racial disparities. That's a theoretical framework. I think what we're talking about today, though, is some contestation and conflict over how you teach about race, racial hierarchies, critically.
There's a racial hierarchy? What? Where am I on the racial hierarchy?
Racism in schools and society. And so the two are being conflated.
And so when you hear people talking repeatedly about critical race theory, what is your thought?
Well, I hear people talking about critical race theory. I see that as a straw man for many communities.
What do you mean a straw man? Isn't that the actual name of it?
Politicians, particularly trying to shape the knowledge base and what we teach students. I think that there is some fear about raising consciousness about structural inequality, about structural racism, because it does implicate many of our practices in our society.
And again, see, they have to frame it as something on an institutional level, something on a level greater than the individual, because they don't want to have individual responsibility for themselves, first of all, and they also don't want you to be able to get out of the situation that they're trying to box you into. They are trying to paint you into a corner here, where you're not able to say, I've never done anything wrong in my life, because they will frame it in a way that says, our problems aren't from any individual person, it's from the entire institution in which you built, your ancestors built, you contributed to, and you benefit from. This is very nasty stuff, and, when some aging, bald, black lesbian explains it to you, it doesn't seem very threatening, but trust me, the implications of this are very, very severe.
It indicates what we would have to do differently in government. And some of that is ideological in terms of there's a lot of resistance to how we do things to be fairer and more just in our society. So, there are a number of, I read a really good article just yesterday in the New Yorker about the origins of this conflict and who's behind it. And it's a concerted effort by many on the right to mitigate the extent to which we really augment and increase the understanding of racism in our society.
Yeah, because if there's one thing Americans don't understand, it's racism, right? That's, I was thinking the other day, what's something that, we'd never talk about in America? Racism. These people look mad.
Some of you may be wondering, what's the deal with the GOP freakout over critical race theory? It's everywhere, and was even used as a GOP call to arms at a conservative Christian conference last week.
Based?
The old Marxism used economics to gain control. The new Marxism...
Yo, this is actually true. I don't like Marco, but that's actually true, okay? I hear 2 seconds of a speech, and I'm like, this. Okay, look, this is cultural Marxism. This is apparently a controversial thing to talk about, but I've always thought it's been a very normal thing to talk about, or not a controversial thing to bring up. Yeah, cultural Marxism, from my understanding, there's a lot of aspects from it, but one of the aspects being when Marx predicted that the working class will get poorer and the rich will get richer, he was only half right. The rich did get richer, but the poor also got a little richer too. Now, proportionately, the wealth gap grew more, but, as Ben Shapiro always says, but the lower class and the upper class, their standard of living both went up. So everyone's happy, right? That's not entirely true. I mean, there's reason to be dissatisfied from that giant gap. But nevertheless, Marx was wrong. The poor did not get poorer. The poor got richer, okay? So what this did is it kind of destroyed this argument of well, eventually the working class will just have nothing. They'll be eating bugs and living in pods. Maybe that will happen to us soon. But, for that reason, because the working class is not doing that right now, we need to find a different way to mobilize them. And the way that they did this is they were like, okay, if we can't hit economics, let's hit other things. Let's hit their sexuality. Let's hit them for being a minority. Let's hit them for this, 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 and this. right? And that's why you hear all the time these Marxists going after like black people, as in like bringing them into the fold. Oh, blacks, you guys should join us. Oh, women, you guys should join us. Oh, you know, Hispanics, you should join us. Transgender people, you should join us. Gays, you should join us. They're collecting all the little like minorities in society to make a majority, a minority majority, and they always frame it. Hear me here. This is very important. Whenever you hear talking as the oppressed and the oppressor, and now you hear a lot of it like institutional versus minority, that is like typical Marxism, classic Marxism, okay? So what Marco's saying here, and he can't obviously come out and say it, and I don't know if this is even what he's implying or what he's trying to say, but Marxism before was all based on economics. They realized that doesn't work. And I mean, it does work in some cases, but not in America, right? Not in these countries that are quite prosperous. What they need to do is focus on other things, intersectionality, feminism. They need to focus on, you know, minority rights and black Americans and Hispanics and immigrants and disabled people and gay people and transgender people.
The new Marxism uses identity politics. And the result is something that looks nothing like America. There's no reason to believe that this new Marxism will result in anything but what the old Marxism resulted in.
Critical race theory is racism, pure and simple.
No, it's not. It's anti-white, and I absolutely hate it. I've talked quite a lot about this. The GOP will consistently, especially people like Mike Pence, they will consistently say that critical race theory is wrong because it's racist. No, it's not wrong because it's racist generically. It's wrong because it's anti-white, okay? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, as someone who is white, with that being my identity, we should not be attacking this. Public schools should not be attacking white people because I'm a white person and that's wrong. I don't want my group being attacked, period. But yet, all these Republicans, they can't say that. They have to say, oh, no, it's not bad because it's anti-white. It's just bad because it's generically racist. It annoys me a lot. Maybe it's a little nitpicky because, you know, but nevertheless,
And it should be
it is anti-white. It's absolutely anti-white too. Is critical race theory teaching about how bad Asians are? Is it teaching how bad blacks are? No, it's not. It's specifically saying how white people are bad. Is it saying that, oh, in Africa, the institutions are black and they mistreat the white people? No, they're not saying that, right? Are they saying, oh, in Japan, the institutions in Japan, you know, these institutions in Japan, they be racist against the white people? No, they're not saying that either. They don't care about white people. They hate white people. That's the point of critical race theory, to justify their hate for whites. So why can't we say that?
by every American of every race.
And let me tell you right now, critical race theory is bigoted, it is a lie, and it is every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets.
Okay, but here's the thing. None of this is random. This is the result of a...
And look, she doesn't even deny it. That's so funny. She's like, okay, look, maybe it is. But here's the thing. This has been... It's like, okay.
highly manufactured strategy created by seasoned political operatives looking for the perfect wedge issue to take back power. Something to combat the energy of the multiracial coalition that took Georgia, and something to replace Blue Lives Matter, since January 6th exposed that slogan as
Blue Lives Matter. I thought the whole claim was the rioters killed cops, and that's what the bad thing was. And there was like only one cop who died, and he died of like kidney failure or something unrelated. I don't know all the facts behind that, but I don't think it was cops storming the Capitol. Let me move the chat.
a sham. Conservatives in Congress took note and started chattering, which was then ingested into the feeder system of Fox News. The tagline disseminated, and the war against critical race theory took off.
I wish I had writers and a teleprompter. I don't have notes. I don't have a script. I don't have a teleprompter running. This chick is so lucky. I was just watching her. I'm like, I think I have pretty similar delivery. I'm like, I'm pretty good at speaking. I wish I had a writer, though. I wish I had a teleprompter. Hit me up if you're a writer or an editor. Hit me up.
No one wants a boogeyman near their kids, and certainly not in their classrooms. The operatives know this. Those fears got played up, and now, along with the fear of trans kids taking over junior high handball, parents are fighting with school boards and...
So demeaning. It's so condescending of her. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, I really don't want my junior high age child, my middle school age child, sharing a locker room with a boy, right, if she's a girl. I really don't want her playing sports with men. who can just totally destroy the girls. And yet, when someone like this, someone in the ruling class, someone who has quite a lot of money, who's wealthy, who's in these, like, you know, uppity-tuppity circles, this is the response.
Taking over junior high handball.
Trans kids taking over junior high handball. Yeah, actually, there's some legitimate concerns about the implications of people just saying, oh, I'm a lady, and then getting whatever they want. Okay? Like, for example, in the UK, I talked about this like 20 times on stream yesterday, so sorry if you were here yesterday. But in the UK, there is a woman who was forced to share a cell in prison with a convicted rapist, okay? She was a woman and he was a man, but he identified as a woman, so he went to a female prison. So there's a guy, a full-grown man. He rapes woman, gets put in prison, but then says, no, I'm a woman. I'm a woman. That was like lesbian rape I did with my penis. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So they put him in a female prison, force him into a cell with a female who's like, whoa. I don't want to be in a locked cage with a rapist. Can I please not be? Can you send him to a guy's prison? It goes all the way to the Supreme Court in the UK. I think it's called the High Court there. And the High Court rules, no, that's a woman. I don't know what you guys are talking about. That's clearly a woman, and she has a right to be in the female prison. So that is like, for example, one of the implications of just going along with this whole, oh, you know, if you just identify as a woman, you're a woman. Oh, okay, so when you're a convicted male rapist and you've raped a woman, you can now be locked in a cage with a woman in a female prison. That makes sense. Oh, okay. Wow. 6 years ago, gay marriage was legalized. 6 years ago, they were making the argument of like, it's just two guys, like, holding hands. What's the big deal? You silly goose. We're just in our house together. You don't even see us. You stay out of our bedroom. Oh, what is it now? Oh, now it's, you better hope your daughter's not in school because she'll be in a changing room with a man, okay? With another boy. You better hope that your child, who's female, never ends up in prison ever. Because if she does, she might be locked in a cage with a male rapist. Jeez. But yet, do people like this care? No, of course not. They don't have to live with the consequences of these decisions. They'll never have to. Their kids won't have to. Only we do.
Parents are fighting with school.
And they wonder why we get someone like Trump elected. Because he actually says the things that we're thinking, not just this political BS, not what her writers tell her to say.
School boards in cities and towns across.
You think this lady, you really think this chick here, like, stays up at night writing her own material? She does all of her own research at home, and then she comes to the studio with all of her notes, and she's ready to go? Of course not. She shows up every day for work, they give her what to say, and she repeats it.
Junior high.
The people who write this are not young black women who are writing in MSNBC. They're these, like, old Jewish guys who are writing all of her stuff to say.
Handball. Parents are fighting with school boards in cities and towns across the country over curricula that they believe teaches white kids that they are racist. None of this is actually happening. But who cares about a little...
Yeah, see, and again, wordplay. I caught that. She was like, okay, these parents think that we're telling their kids that the kids are racist. That's not true. And it's like, yeah, we just watched the other video. You don't say that individuals are racist. You say that the systems that their parents made, the systems that they're a part of, the systems that they're contributing to on a daily basis are racist. And therefore, they're all beneficiaries of racism, right? It's just as bad. If not, it's worse than saying they're all racist. You know, if you say you're a racist, you can be like, oh no, my best friend's black. You know, but if you say you're a beneficiary of a racist system, there's absolutely nothing you can do or ever can do to be disassociated with that. That's way worse, in my opinion.
Whole thing like the truth when you have the perfect campaign buzzword for 2022. It even has the magic word in it, race. Joining me now is Kimberly Crenshaw, co-founder and executive director of the
Oh my gosh. Jeez.
African American Policy Forum and the legal scholar who coined the term critical race theory. So it is your fault, madame. I tripped over the curb this morning and I went, critical race theory? Damn you! You
know, it's funny because they do that about white people. Yeah. Like, that she's trying to be all ironic and hyperbolic, but they do blame whites for just about everything, don't they? I didn't get the job, must have been white people. I have to cut my hair to look more professional, must be white people, must be racism. If you just took out, like, critical race, then it would be correct. You'd just be like, oh, racism, oh, white people.
You tripped me on the call. It does everything bad. I mean, and the cicadas, y'all really need to stop with the cicadas critical race theory. That was not nice.
We can throw everything in the bag. Everything in the bag.
So I just wrote down a few of the notes of what people are calling critical race theory. Marxism.
See, that right there, that was how she speaks normally. You know what I mean? Like, you can tell when she's on script and off script. Listening to that, I'm like, oh, this is why I'm not friends with women. This is why I've never been friends with girls, because this is how they talk, and it's so annoying. And I realized, wait a minute, that wasn't what she was saying before. She sounded very professional up here. Like I said, people write for her what to say.
Racism, bigoted. Let's start with the Marxism. That's their favorite one. They're using that every single time. And I hate to ask dumb questions, so please don't think that I'm dumb. Is critical race theory Marxism?
Look, you know what? Here's the thing, Joy. Critical race theory is not so much a thing. It's a way of looking.
Why didn't she deny it? Why didn't she say no? What? All right. I hate to ask, but is critical race theory Marxism? And the other chick's like, well, the thing is, you gotta think of it like a way of thinking.
At a thing. It's a way of looking at race. It's a way of looking at why after...
Again, with the flowery language. Is it Marxism? Well, it's a way of looking at race. Oh, okay. So you mean it's like a perspective on race? Okay, what does that mean?
So many decades, centuries actually, since the emancipation, we have patterns of inequality that are enduring. They are stubborn. And the point of critical race theory originally was to think and talk about how law contributed to the subordinate status of African Americans, of indigenous...
A little late to that conversation, fam. I think we're like 50, 60, 70 years past that conversation, but whatever, go on.
People and of an entire group of people who were coming to our shores from Asia. And the point was, quite frankly, to understand the problem in order to intervene in it, to understand why the greatest hopes for our republic were not being realized, even
again, what she's saying so many words. I'm totally zoning out here.
though
say something of meaning. Say something of like actual value.
Were encoded in law. So critical race theory just inherits the beliefs and the hopes of Frederick Douglass, of Martin Luther King, who basically want the law to do for the freed people what the law did for enslavers. And we picked that up in the 70s and 80s after the civil rights movement to say, okay, so now we've had this big civil rights movement. We have all these laws in the books, but things really aren't looking as different as they should if we are really the society that we say we are.
So basically, she's saying that she wants more than what she got. Is that it? I wanted more than what I got.
So we put about the task of...
Because, you see, you look at things like incarceration rates. You look at things like acceptance into universities or even high schools. And blacks fall behind on these categories. But why is that? Is it because of the laws that were made? Is it because of the history of racism? Or is it because there's genetic differences between blacks and whites? And if you look at large populations of people, one or two standard deviations in so far as like IQ, for example, that can go a long ways insofar as determining crime and acceptance into universities and so on and so forth. So maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't white people. The problem isn't racism. The problem isn't America. The problem is there's just genetic differences between the races. And some races are better at some things than others, and other races are better at other things than others, right? It's very frustrating hearing this line over and over again. You know, why is it that you're not getting what you want? Is it really white people's fault?
Understanding how law wasn't just the neutral referee. Law wasn't always on our side. In fact, law was less on our side than for on our side.
And you'd think, too, by the way, after all this time of these like racist laws, you'd think after all this time of racism in America, why don't they just want to leave? I never understood this. Why are people like this not calling for separation? Right? Why aren't they calling for divorce with America? Is this not considered irreconcilable differences? It certainly seems like it would be considered that. This person is like, oh, after 400 years, America is still mistreating us. Oh, and you think after what, another couple generations, it's all just going to go away? I mean, if we're in a system that has continually oppressed blacks, which I don't believe that's true. I think it's quite the opposite, actually. But let's just assume that's true for sake of argument. Don't you think it's about time that maybe you guys start saying, let's break things off? If you were dating someone for 400 years and they were still mistreating you, don't you think you might want to go off on your own and be single? You know, go find another partner? I don't know. I just find it funny that that's never suggested. Like, not once. Like, you know, if I was the news anchor, I'd be like, hey, have you guys ever considered, like, just taking a state for yourselves? Would that fix the problem? Then there's no more white people to be racist to you.
And we wanted to...
You know why they don't do that? Because they're not told to do that. These people have funders, these people have donors, these people have people who influence them. Sometimes they don't even know it, right? This woman works at Columbia University, I believe it said. There's people around her who are influencing her every single day on what to think and what to say. Her professors have influenced her in the past, her friends and family. Many people are influencing these individuals. So, of course, they come up with these ideas that really align with other groups' interests.
Tell these stories in order...
Instead of, you know, what's best for their own group's interests.
To do better with the promises that are embedded in the Constitution. That's what's in critical race theory.
So is critical race...
The Constitution was not made for black people. I hate to say it, but, like, you know, maybe you could say that's wrong, right? You could say that's evil, but when black people say the Constitution is like a racist document, they're right. I mean, the Constitution was made for white, like, Anglo-Saxon men who were Protestant. It's pretty clear. And the Founding Fathers, the people who actually wrote the Constitution, you know, we should take their perspective into account if we're talking about the Constitution. The people who created the Constitution, they had slaves who were black, okay? They didn't consider Irish people to be white. They didn't let Slavs into the country because they weren't white enough, right? So, yeah, I don't really know how many promises were made to minority groups like Mexicans and blacks and, you know, Guatemalans in the Constitution. I don't know how you could read into that and get that from that, but that's just untrue.
Theory, is there a K through 12 curriculum that right now is being taught? I'm sorry, I know it's a dumb question, but is there a K through 12 curriculum on critical race theory that's being taught in schools around this country?
See, and you know, and you know she has to ask the questions because she's embarrassed to ask them. You know that she has written questions that someone else wrote for her that she has to read. She's a puppet. How can I get one of these jobs? Can I get like a right-wing version of this? Get paid $200,000 a year to go on the news and just read questions to people?
Well, look, Joy, if it was news to most Americans...
Wait, Joy, isn't this the girl who said that she doesn't agree with gay marriage? I think she's the homophobe.
That critical race theory was in K through 12. It was news to me too. I'm one of the co-authors of one of the few books on critical race theory. I think I would know if we were being taught.
Why would you know? You write a book. How would you know the how would you know if racism is being taught in kindergarten just because you wrote a book on racism? That's so stupid.
In K through 12. I mean,
I think I would know. See, I wrote a book on the topic in which we discuss it.
Basically, critical race theory, classic critical race theory is a law school course. And it's really, you know, not taught.
Law school? Law school? Why is it in law school? That's concerning.
It is widely.
Could you imagine? You're like in court for something, anything, right? And the prosecutor, some black dude who took, or black woman, the prosecutor is this woman, or one of her students that took this critical race theory class and learned how white people always benefit from the institutions, you know, like the judicial system in America and other institutions, including the court system. I mean, they come down on you so hard, right? Isn't that reasonable to believe that if you take courses teaching you that white people get it better in court, that you're going to go harder on them as like a prosecutor, as a judge?
Yes, I would hope it would. Yeah. But here's the deal. This is not about whether anything called critical race theory is in K through 12. What they're calling critical race theory doesn't exist anyway. It is a backlash effort to reverse the racial reckoning unlike any we've seen in our lifetime. And as you pointed out at the beginning, they can't say, you know, we're for racism. They can't say Derek Chauvin should have killed.
So wait, if you're not in favor of critical race theory, that means you're like in favor of racism? Oh, okay. All right then.
George Floyd with his hand in his pocket, looking like he was completely without a care in the world. They couldn't say that. So they looked around and found a strange sounding theory that they could put all of the grievances and resentments in and mobilize people around this boogeyman. And if our side can't really understand what's going on, it's going to work. It's worked in the past. It worked to end Reconstruction, and it can work to end this reckoning too. And
a gentleman named Christopher Rufo, who's very vigorously requested to be on the show. We're gonna take him up on it and let him come on this week and invite him on. He literally said, "We've successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all the various cultural insanities under that brand category." To wit, Fox News has mentioned critical race theory nearly 1,300 times in the past 3.5 months. And we've now discovered that a lot of these parents that are showing up at school boards, inveighing against their children being taught that they're, racist, turns out they are actually Republican activists, not just regular old parents.
Big surprise there.
That's kind of based, actually. This is like one of the only things I've seen Republicans actually mobilize over. That's actually kind of inspiring. If only they would say it's wrong because it's anti-white.
Were framed as reverse discrimination against white people. It won after Brown versus Board of Education, when integration was framed as damaging white children. And it could win now if people don't wake up and have a sense of what's at stake. So yeah, you're going to hear all these stories cherry picked.
Yeah, that's like that's some type of argumentative fallacy or whatever. There's like straw men and ad hominems. There's something called, Mozart's mode or something like that, right? And it's basically where you're trying to make a controversial point, and then you give a super uncontroversial point to make people more comfortable with your controversial point. So for example, she's trying to say critical race theory isn't bad. People are saying it's bad, but look, people said Brown versus Board of Education was bad and it's poisoning the minds of white kids, and that's crazy. So anyways, critical race theory is like the same. You're trying to equivocate. Is that a word? You're trying to make equal your controversial position with a uncontroversial position. And by the way, we've talked before about the consequences of Brown versus Board of Education. It goes much deeper than just, blacks and whites are in school together. It's a little more complex than that, and you can go ahead and watch my Freemason video if you want to learn more about that. It was decided that Brown versus Board of Education decision was decided by 8 Freemasons on the Supreme Court and 1 Jewish justice. So 9 out of 9 not Christians. Very interesting point to be made, but that's another video. You can go watch the Freemason video for that take.
Stories. Turns out a lot of them were not verifiable that the other side is putting out there. You're not going to hear, and you should, what is happening with these bans. You're not going to hear that an essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates was the reason why a school teacher was fired. You're not going to hear about the affinity groups in colleges and universities and the programs.
Can we find an actual critical race theory class?
Okay, so critical race theory is what we're moving into now.
All right.
And so...
What? Oh, look, it is literally anti-whiteness. I know my face is over this. Here, let me move my face. Look at this. It says whiteness project videos. Whiteness? Could you imagine if we were saying blackness? Holy. Oh yeah, it's we're training people on their blackness, like the blackness, they talking a little too loud at the lunch table, laughing a little too loud when they're with their friends. The inappropriate music, it's blackness. That would be so offensive. You could never get away with doing that, especially in a professional environment like this. But yet, when it comes to white people, absolutely okay. It's totally fine. Holy.
There are, so critical race theory comes out of the legal studies. And it started roughly in the early mid-90s. And
what a soy boy. Look at the soy face here.
It has now permeated most fields in academia. And so it's an excellent way to begin studying race. What they do and the research that has come out of critical race theorists has really...
All this studying race, and they still haven't figured out there's differences between the races. Isn't that funny? Isn't that just funny?
Shifted the way...
And why is that controversial? I have to have this conversation almost on a daily basis with conservatives. I talk to conservatives and Republicans every single day about this, and I say, okay, I have to start from square one all the time. I say there's differences between the races, which is why there's different outcomes over big groups of races. Now, on an individual level, it's hard to tell. It'd be kind of silly to say like, oh, you're black, so I'm going to judge you. It doesn't really work like that. But when you're dealing with like 40 million people, you can look at like averages and you can see, oh, okay, this group on average is going to commit more crime. This group on average is going to get into school more, like Asians, let's say. You can make some actually pretty accurate predictions based on patterns over big groups. So I tell conservatives the reason that there's different outcomes for races is because there's differences between the races. It is not because of working hard necessarily. It's not because of racism or anything like that. It's not because of any of these components outside of just your IQ and your genetics and your cognitive ability. So I'll always say, okay, can we agree that there's some genetic differences? And they'll always say no. And I'll say, okay, what about skin color? Whites have white skin and blacks have black skin. That's not like because black people tan as soon as they're born with black skin. That's genetic. That's a genetic difference. Look at that. They have different types of hair, right? They have different like muscle structures and things like this. They have different like nose, and Asians have different eyes than whites, right? There's differences between all the races that are genetic. And then they'll usually concede to that because you'd be retarded not to. And then I say, okay, now isn't it reasonable to believe that the genetics is not exclusive to phenotypic differences, meaning like differences you can see, like skin color and eye color and stuff? Don't you think it's reasonable to believe that there's some internal genetic differences as well, like blood cell shapes and stuff like that? Like sickle cell blood cells are different for blacks than whites. And maybe like IQ, maybe athletic abilities, things like this. And sometimes they'll come around, and then you got to hit the nail on the head. This one's kind of hard to say, but it's like, okay, so don't you think that, like, for example, Asians are in university more than whites and blacks because they're just smarter? And because they're predisposed to be higher IQ, so it just makes sense. And then sometimes they'll concede, sometimes they won't. I like to say the NBA, all right? Is that the basketball one? I don't watch basketball. I don't watch sports. The NBA is 90% black or 80% black. Is this because the organization is like a black supremacist organization? No, of course not. I think blacks are just predisposed. They're what's the word I'm looking for? They are more likely to be athletic than whites and Asians, okay? The reason that Asians make up like 1% of the NBA is not because the NBA is racist against Asians and hates Asian people. It's just that Asians are not as athletic. But in the same way, the reason that blacks are only 1% of people at like Harvard versus Asians is because maybe Asians are just smarter. There are racial differences between all the races.
We understand.
That was a very long-winded and unorganized way of saying there are racial differences.
And race to reflect more accurately how race and racism function.
And I don't know how people can't recognize that.
It's not really a methodology in the way that other fields have methodologies. It's more of a thematic approach. And so we actually like a thematic approach. And so there are several themes that we want to highlight for our work here in practicing anti-racism that we think are important from critical race theory. And so the first is that racism is normal, that racism is part of how our society operates. Like it's just the normal way our society operates. And so one of the things that this means is that racism is the common everyday experience of most BIPOC.
Same thing with this. He's just repeating everything that he learned in his little Zoom seminar.
Folks. And so that's what critical race theorists have pointed out. Anti-racist movements tend to make progress when it is in the best interests of those in positions of power.
No one has a single unitary identity. Unless you're white, then you're just the devil, right? What's wrong with having a single identity? There's nothing wrong with saying, like, I'm a Christian, that's my identity.
Or not necessarily due to moral persuasion. So the example that's used, like the classic example, is the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. And so what critical race theorists have pointed out with the Civil Rights Act is that it wasn't only the civil rights activists and their efforts that gained the signing of the Civil Rights Act. Another critical aspect of this were white political elites and the interests of the United States on the world stage.
Yeah, there was some white political elites behind the Civil Rights Act and Civil Rights Movement. That's an interesting take. I think that there's a lot of white, globalist, rich oligarchs in America today that are pushing things similar.
So at this
Interesting
time, in the late
enough.
60s, the U.S. was involved in Vietnam and the Cold War. And so trying to spread democracy around the world, and it's hard to spread democratic ideals around the world.
This guy's serious.
A major swath of people.
Wait, so we can't kill communists unless blacks have the right to vote and shop wherever they want. Yeah, you're not allowed to, we wouldn't be allowed to spread democracy in America unless, you know, black people were allowed to work anywhere a white person was allowed to work. That makes sense. Because, you know, when the communists were being killed, their first concern wasn't like about dying or about America taking over. It wasn't about anything related to the war. It was their first thought, oh, how are black people treated in America?
Within the world stage look very hypocritical.
Why does America revolve around black people? That's all conservatives talk about. It's all these liberals talk about. And Democrats. Is there nothing else that America can be concerned about? You know, people will often say that this whole racial divide is just a distraction while, you know, the ruling class does things behind the scenes. I'm beginning to think that is more true every day when all we do is talk about the racial divides and stuff. You know, like, for example, I can never say her name, Galil Maxwell or whatever. Harvey, not Harvey. Who's the other guy? Jeffrey Epstein's, you know, accomplice. She was about to go to trial. And then that's when all the BLM stuff happened. And then the trial got pushed. And now it's going to happen this August, next month. And now people are like, oh, there's going to be way more race stuff going on. So no one sees the trial. I mean, I guess we'll find out. But I used to think those guys were crazy. Now I'm like,
And so signing the Civil Rights Act was a way to reckon for political whites, or like elite political whites, for them to reconcile that hypocritical problem on the world stage.
And again, it's like, you really think that the ruling class in America, these powerful elites that are white in America, do you really think that they needed to give black people like the right to vote? And I mean, they already did, the right to sit on the front of the bus to feel better about themselves. Maybe there was some suburban housewife who thought that, but like the people who actually make decisions, they don't care about black people. They don't care about white people. They care about themselves, right? That's absolutely ridiculous.
And so interest convergence. Then
what are they teaching people? I can't believe they're teaching this. They walk out of this saying, oh, the only reason that blacks have the right to vote and the blacks don't have to sit on the back of the bus is because white people felt bad. So white people are still bad, but they felt bad, so they gave black people the right to do it, but only so they could take over the world through making democracy on communist countries. That makes sense.
Trying to gain, you know, access to the democratic process, really, to gain access to civil rights, and then political elite whites wanting to appear like democracy was important. And so that's interest convergence. And then intersectionality, which is what's coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a legal theorist. And this came out of her
legal
as a
theorist
black woman moving in within the black community, working for racial justice, and then within mostly white feminist circles working for and so intersectionality is the idea that we have.
Holy, this is boring. Okay, so I guess the moral of the story is don't go to university, because this sucks. This is so annoying. I can't believe this. This is what's being taught to people. Oh, jeez. Pain, man. Absolute pain.